Hello, everyone. So I'm here to talk about open collections for museums in the digital age from my perspective at M+, a new museum of visual culture in Hong Kong with a building that's opening next year. Very thrilled to say. And I'd like to start by situating us here in a very particular kind of desert, a cultural desert, which is the term I would hear growing up in Hong Kong in the 1980s and 90s, usually by Westerners commenting on the lack of intrinsic culture in the city I grew up in. So I am from a British Filipino family, and I went to a French school very much with a Western education. And I think that I internalized the idea that culture is something that happened elsewhere, even though that is patently not true. So something that's really important to understand about Hong Kong is our political in-betweenness. So in the 1840s, at the end of the First Opium War, China handed over, use the term hand over here, it's a question of perspective, Britain, Hong Kong. So Hong Kong became a colony for 150 years. When that lease expired, the 150-year lease expired, we were returned to China, and we now exist with a system of government that's independent, and this will be our condition until 2047. So there's a lot of uncertainty and unknowability about what will happen in the future, and of course that creates a lot of tension. And here's a bit of a paradox. These conditions, that of being a cultural desert and also of being a place that's in between, on the one hand, allow you to expand your definition of culture, and on the other hand, perhaps, if you are thinking about tensions as being something that we've all read about in the news and create a lot of anxiety in our present moment, perhaps it's something that turns into a source of strength as well. And so it's in this context that we're building M+, which is a new museum dedicated to collecting, interpreting, and exhibiting the visual culture, so not just visual art, but also moving image, art, design, and architecture of the 20th and 21st centuries. And we're a museum that looks out at the world from our base in Hong Kong. This is where we are in the world. So you can see we're situated in the heart of Asia in relation to all the different Asias that we exist in. And you can see West Asia here. And if you zoom in a little closer, you can see that we're part of a region known as the Pearl River Delta region, also the Greater Bay Area. So there's always this question of names and perspective and positioning. And it's a region of 120 million people that's connected to Hong Kong through a high-speed railway that opened recently very close to our museum. This is what we're building in context. So it's a archival photo of our district. We belong to the West Kowloon Cultural District. Well, there will be many, many institutions that are opening. Recently, we opened Chinese Opera House. We're about to open a Black Box Theater, and M+ will be coming online next year. And here is where we're looking out in the world from. So you can see that we're on Victoria Harbour, we're looking at the Hong Kong skyline, and also that we're connected out into the open sea. So we're a city archipelago of 8 million people, and we also have islands as part of our context. This is our future building, designed by Herzog and de Meuron. And while we're very, very excited about our building opening, we've been under construction, and we've actually been operating as a museum since 2012. So this photo is a little bit old. We've actually topped out, so we've reached the top of our building. We've been exhibiting, building our team, building our collections, running public programs, and you could say that although our building doesn't open until next year, we're in many ways already open. So I'm going to take a step back from M+ itself and try and talk about my own journey to M+ and how this fits in with what I do there. So my journey to M+ began with me living in London and at the time when the Tate Modern opened, so this is Olafur Eliasson's The Weather Project, and this to me really transformed what my perception of what a museum could be. So of course I'd been to museums, I liked museums, I loved art, although it was a subject that stopped being offered at my school when I was 16. And this showed me that a museum could be a place where people could come and feel welcome and feel active and participatory in an experience. So people could actually come into this giant turbine hall space and make themselves comfortable, lie down, and be a part of something that made us feel kind of whole and connected with each other. At the time I was working in book publishing, I was an editor, and you can see that Hong Kong visual culture made its way to me. I was working at Thames and Hudson in London. And I ended up finding my way back to Hong Kong, where I became a writer, and I was writing about culture in Asia and the region, usually for international publications. And this for me was an exploration of what actually was happening in this so-called cultural desert, an environment that had kind of been dismissed to me when I was young. At the time, I had a lot of time as a freelance independent writer to pursue independent projects, and this is one called Human Negotiations. It's a book that I wrote, co-authored with a photographer called Katerina Hesse, and I was living in Bangkok at the time, and it was about sex workers in Bangkok. So you can imagine how closed the people can be with regard to this kind of subject matter. There was something unique, I think, about our perspective and that we were women writing about this. And I love this quote by Olafur Eliasson again: "This is where the world becomes negotiable. It is open and inclusive instead of closed and exclusive." I finally stopped being a freelancer, and I joined an organization called the Wall Street Journal, where I learned to be digital. So I learned about social media, I learned about digital publishing and authorship, and I finally made my way to creating multimedia experiences, so bringing people together to tell bigger stories than I could tell on my own. So Kowloon Walled City was a disputed pocket of land in Hong Kong. Neither Britain nor China would exactly lay claim to it. Neither could agree what to do with it, so it became a kind of no man's land for immigrants and, some say outlaws. There was a lot of crime. Britain eventually, they demolished it because, frankly, the British government was a little embarrassed about having something like this that they were going to hand over to China. And so it no longer exists except in the popular imagination. So this is a few years old. The technology looks a bit old, but you can see the attempt to create a kind of open-ended experience of this place that no longer exists. So we interviewed the people, we took archival footage of the insides, the interiors of Kowloon Walled City so that people could explore for themselves different areas. We told about the history as well, but of course, all of this is to give context in an open-ended way of something that now really only exists in the popular imagination. So Kowloon Walled City looms large, people love it, people are always kind of fantasizing about it and maybe orientalizing it a little bit. But so it shows up in movies like Batman, Bloodsport, in there's a Japanese warehouse arcade which recreates Kowloon Walled City, and novels like The Bourne Supremacy. I produced a documentary as part of this that was so popular. You can see what digital is able to do in terms of expanding the reach of your storytelling. 1.2 million people saw it on YouTube. And this actually brings me back to Hong Kong, and this brings me back to M+, because Kowloon Walled City is part of the M+ collections. So foundational to what I do at M+ is this idea of open access. And open access really means open access to institutional knowledge. So it means getting things out of people's brains, literally. So ideas, knowledge, information, and sharing it out into the world. And when it comes to our content, our remit is to imagine, invent, and interpret the new Asian canon through a multidisciplinary approach. So this informs digital, something that's really important to understand about digital in the context of our museum is that digital is not about the technologies, it's really about the content. So I'm going to show you a diagram, a couple of diagrams that look a little bit corporate, but I think it's important to see. So on the one hand, content is about, our digital is about content, not about technologies, and it's the content that drives our experiences that we create. So these are called the products. We learn about the experiences and how people are experiencing our products through insights. So understanding through data and analytics how people are responding so that we can create new experiences. So content is a very broad category for maybe the kinds of collections that we're thinking about in the context of this two-day event. If you think about where digital sits at M+, or just for your information, we actually sit within the curatorial team. But the reality is that for us to do what we do and for us to operate as a 21st century museum, digital actually needs to work with everyone. So not just curatorial, but learning interpretation, editorial, collections and exhibitions. So this is what, in practicality, and I can talk very nerdily about what this actually means in terms of cloud-based tools and things, but this is how we operate to be digital. So everything starts with content. And when you are thinking about content as your starting point, then really our main endeavor becomes storytelling. So these are the 4 types of content that do most well with our audiences, that our audiences love. So they want to hear stories and they want us to tell stories about our collections. Storytelling that does really well is also about our team. People want to meet our team. There's stories about our building. People are very curious about the building, not just about the fact that it's, when it's going to open, but also the design and architecture stories around our building, and also our behind-the-scenes work on our collection. So here's one of our conservators working on a neon sign. So just before I joined M+, this was the first online exhibition, interactive online exhibition, and the first exhibition that, online exhibition that the museum had done. And as part of its exhibition, we had asked the public to take pictures of neon signs around Hong Kong. Around 4,000 people submitted their photographs of neon signs in Hong Kong, many of which no longer exist. So this created a kind of digital archive of neon in our city on this neon map. So when I joined M+, we didn't have any kind of permanent online presence, and so it was important as an institution to build and consolidate our content, so editorial, curatorial, artistic content into one place. And we've created a platform called M+ Stories. This includes blog posts, journal articles on an online publication called Podium that is managed by Stephanie Bailey, who's here. We have videos here. We showcase online exhibitions and also interactive artist commissions, digital artist commissions. So yeah, it's all about the content. Please come and explore the site, sign up for our newsletter. So everything that we do as a museum based in Hong Kong is in 2 languages, so in English as well as traditional Chinese, which is the script we use in Hong Kong. And we decided really early on when building this platform to create something that was inclusive and accessible. So that means for all the videos that we do transcripts, and we create alternative text, and we create closed captions. So we work with the Hong Kong Blind Union. And we also wanted to feature artists. So here is our first artistic commission, a hardcore digital detox by the amazing Chinese artist Miao Ying. Please go and come and check it out. We group all this content together using an experimental tag-based framework. So we create groupings of content around theme and lenses. And you can see that this is cumulative and almost kind of almost a bit aggressive as an experience, but it's something that is going to underlie all our future digital applications that we're building. And of course, we're not just publishing our content into a vacuum, we're also building relationships and creating relationships with our audiences. So I'm going to show you an example of how that works. So we published this video on Hofan, who's a photographer who took black and white photos of Hong Kong in the 1960s, 50s, and 60s. And this is what happened when we shared it on social media. So it was really popular. People, responded to us, and it wasn't just, all emojis. People were actually sharing with us their personal stories about what photography meant to them, their journey to photography, how they were not inspired, and they saw, with this access to the artists speaking about their own practice, how they were inspired to go and take photography in themselves. So, it's amazing what people are willing to share. So conversations take place on social media. We also want to give access to our experts, to our curators. So we run Ask a Curator with each one of our temporary exhibition programs. You can see that these conversations can take place on social media. They can take place via the M+ Stories blog. They also take place physically in the exhibitions. And here's another example of how we give access using social media hashtags. So Ask a Curator, this is our learning and interpretation curator, who again was in conversation over the course of a day with our audiences, asking about curatorial practice and various aspects of her work. So another aspect of open access is also open data, and that means releasing our institutional knowledge into the public domain with unlimited use. And this is empowering our audiences to create their own experiences based on that data. So lots and lots of room for experimentation. And this is a diagram that I'm going to try not to it looks a little complicated, but the fundamental thing to understand is that our content, it's really important for our content to, when you're building an institution, for it not to be kind of over here and over there. It's really important for it to be all in one place. So we've been working to create a source of truth through our collections database, get all our content into one place so that we can bring it out and flow it out into all our future digital experiences. We use a technology called an API. It just means application programming interface, but don't worry, all it means is kind of our connective tissue. It's our sort of central nervous system, maybe that's a better analogy, that allows our content to come from one place and feed all these different digital platforms. And so it's going to power all kinds of interfaces in the future. And the one that we're about to release, and I'm going to give you a preview of, it's still very unfinished, and actually the nature of it is to be unfinished, is our collections beta website. So it's an ever-evolving beta. We've been creating a collections website with the goal in mind that it's not just for scholars, although of course it will serve scholarly purposes, but we want it to be generous, and we want it to be accessible to people who are not experts in art. So we're experimenting with different ways into exploring our collections, and one of them is, the one that we're starting with when we launch this, is actually color. So you might want to explore the M+ collections through the color yellow, or the color pink, or green, or blue. And it's not just about sharing our collections out into the world, but we also want to partner with different people. We want to collaborate with our publics, other institutions. We love collaboration. Here's an example of how we partnered with Asia Art Archive to create Wikipedia editathons. So an editathon is a very intensive event where editors who may or may not have participated in Wikipedia before, the open source knowledge platform, will get together to improve representation around certain subjects. So this was on women in art in Asia. This was launched last year in alignment with the global art and feminism movement, and we're running it again this March in case anyone wants to participate with us and improve that kind of representation. This is from another event. This is an article that I created on the major traveling exhibition, Cities on the Move, an exhibition of visual culture. This Wikipedia article did not exist before I wrote it. And so, again, if anyone has the opportunity to participate in this kind of event, it's an incredibly powerful thing. We'll quickly show you that we run hackathons, people make things, I can hear music, AR applications, emoji translate. Someone made a M+ sim experience, exploring our collections data. And of course, we work with artists. So I will very, very quickly end with what's next. So we're going to continue to explore our collections through experimental tools that we'll offer to the public, always evolving. We're creating an online experience of the M+SIG collection, exploring the collections through artists and movements and time. Chronology actually is very important when you're telling the history of the recent past, and maybe that history is not so known. We're creating in-gallery technologies, experiences for people to explore our collections physically, intellectually, emotionally, in interactive ways. A digital guide that's audio-based. Audio is still very important. And finally, our LED facade, which is going to be a primary place for people to experience artworks, moving image artworks on the Victoria Harbour skyline. Finally, a conceptual diagram of how all these different experiences fit together with the M+ collections, the literal sense of our objects sitting in the middle and flowing out, so the inside of the M+ building being in dialogue with the outside world and vice versa, and being responsive both ways. And so I'd like to end by just questioning the idea, which we've been questioning over the course of these 2 days, of what a collection is. Of course, it's not just about cultural relics, physical artifacts, which is what was relevant to the museums of the past. For the museums today, thinking about collections as being digital. Aren't our lives now a collection of digital artifacts? Isn't our culture now, or the representation of our culture now, a digital culture? And isn't the content about those digital artifacts perhaps the artifacts themselves? So thank you.